Celebrity English chef Jamie Oliver is not only in the cooking business, he's also in the children's book business, releasing the well-received Billy and the Giant Adventure in April 2023. From the reviews I've seen, children really like it, and it constantly receives good reviews. Earlier this year, May 2024, Oliver released the sequel to his best-selling first book, Billy and the Epic Escape, again well received and enjoyed by children across the world. Although this rating has somewhat been skewed by recent reviews, if you look at reviews from a couple of months ago, they were pretty much consistently good. But if you look at reviews from this month, all from Australia mind you, 1 star, erasure, trivialisation and stereotyping of Australian First Nations peoples, a damaging and disrespectful book. Disrespectful to Indigenous Australians, offensive stereotypes of First Nations peoples. I hope Jamie Oliver does the right thing and republishes the book after consulting with the First Nations peoples of Australia. First Nations people matter. Stories referencing First Nations people, told through a colonial lens. As of November 2024, 6 months after its initial release, suddenly it's the worst book in the world, and anyone who reads it and enjoys it is evil. I wonder if any of these reviewers actually read the book. If you look at the major book retailers, for example, if we click on Penguin Random House, whoops, page not found. How about the book grocer? We're sorry, that item can't be found right now. What about Larrikin House? Nah, page not found. QBD? Surprise, surprise, product not found. Anyway, you get the idea. Perhaps surprisingly, if you search for a bookshop in the UK, Waterstones for example, then you can still buy the book. It's only us Aussies who aren't allowed to put our eyes on this offensive and repugnant book. Although Waterstones do note that it's not available right now, so perhaps British people aren't allowed to read it either. It's weird, just a few complaints from a few Aboriginal activists and the book is essentially banned. Who says Aboriginal people don't have a voice? They seem to have the power to cancel international best-selling authors. The lady shown on screen is actually Sue-Ann Hunter, she if you couldn't figure it out. She's a commissioner for the Yurok Justice Commission and comes from Naarm, modern-day Melbourne, I believe, although she clearly doesn't acknowledge the existence of such a colonial place name. I'll get back to her soon. It's weird, despite this book being released almost 6 months ago, it's only now that people seem to have an issue with it. For many months, children have been raving about this book. You'd think if it was inherently evil, then somebody would have noticed it in the first week, or at least the first month. But no, 6 months later, things have suddenly come unstuck. The conversation, Jamie Oliver's novel really missed the mark. It's funny, only 6 months later in November, it's missed the mark. The ABC were a bit harsher. The book Jamie Oliver shouldn't have written. That's weird, only in November they say he shouldn't have written it, a book he released in May. One would think this book is titled Billy and the Racist Indigenous Cannibals, the way the media are going on about it. So what's the actual issue with the book? Well, apparently, I can't actually get hold of the book myself, as I am forbidden from viewing its racist contents. Doesn't this feel reminiscent of the old book-burning days? But yes, apparently there is a chapter called To Steal a Child, in which a wicked woman teleports to Alice Springs in Central Australia to kidnap an Indigenous child to join her press gang of other kidnapped children from other countries. Why? Because First Nations children seem to be more connected with nature. The adults responsible for the young girl who lives in foster care are distracted by the woman's promise of funding for their community projects. Once abducted, the little girl tells the other children that she can read people's minds and communicate with animals and plants, because that's the Indigenous way. Despite being an Alice Springs girl, she uses words from the Gimilaroi people of New South Wales and Queensland. Anyway, that's pretty much the extent of the problems with this book. Back to Yurok Justice Commissioner Sue-Ann Hunter, she commented, Jamie Oliver's children's book represents a deeply concerning example of how Indigenous peoples continue to face misrepresentation and cultural appropriation in mainstream media. The complete lack of consultation with First Nations peoples. Oh, so if I write a fictional fantasy book about, say, ninjas, do I have to consult the Japanese Parliament now? The harmful stereotyping of Indigenous peoples as having mystical powers and being more connected with nature. So in a fantasy book where people can teleport to other countries, the idea of giving the Indigenous character some magical powers is somehow wrong? Does that mean characters like Harry Potter are harmful stereotypes of young glasses-wearing British boys who cast spells and wield magical wands? No, it's a fictional story. Up until November, all the kids loved this story. Surely Indigenous children too like the idea of having magical powers. The particularly insensitive choice to include themes of child stealing, given the painful historical context of the stolen generations in Australia. Does this mean that Indigenous characters can never be kidnapped in works of fiction ever again? Only non-Indigenous people are allowed to be fictionally kidnapped? Isn't that kind of exclusionary and perhaps even racist? The careless mixing of different Indigenous languages and cultures. There is no space in Australian publishing or elsewhere for our stories to be told through a colonial lens. So basically, Indigenous characters are off limits across the entire globe. Unless, of course, they are consulted, which I assume would involve a hefty fee. Of course, Jamie Oliver has apologised, but unsurprisingly, that's not enough. How dare you write a successful children's book 6 months ago that includes an Indigenous character without us knowing about it? Ms Hunter commented, while Oliver has apologised, the impact of such misrepresentation on First Nations children and communities cannot be understated. This is why it's crucial for publishers to involve First Nations peoples at every stage of the publishing process when their stories and experiences are being used. You know what this will result in? Nobody will want to include Indigenous characters ever again because it's too much hassle. And if you don't think these people are serious, Jamie Oliver urged to engage with Truth-Telling Commission amid book fallout. Yes, they want to haul an international author and chef before the Victoria State Uric Justice Commission. They seem to think they have the same powers as the International Criminal Court. Delusions of grandeur, megalomania. Now that is a work of fiction.